Throughout history, some mysteries were never meant to be solved. But what happens when we uncover the truth only to find it more terrifying than the legend? From haunted relics that scream in the night to locked rooms hiding frozen corpses, these are not just tales, they're real. These 5 cases were finally solved after centuries, but the answers were darker, stranger, and far more disturbing than anyone expected. You've been warned, this is history like you've never seen it. The Whispering Tomb of the Silent Nun. In the cold hills of northern England, nestled in the outskirts of Lancashire, stood the decaying remnants of a 17th-century Carmelite monastery. It had long been abandoned, the grey stonework wrapped in creeping ivy, its graveyard sinking under centuries of rain. For nearly 200 years, the place was nothing more than a ruin that villagers avoided. Not because of its haunted reputation, though it certainly had one, but because of what was heard from within its crypt. Whispers. Faint, indistinct voices echoing through the stone, most often at night, always around the same time. The whispers had become local folklore, passed down in fearful tones. Farmers reported hearing what sounded like Latin prayers being softly recited near the crypt. Children dared each other to approach it, but none stayed long. Some heard crying. Others claimed the whispers turned into screams when lightning lit the sky. These weren't just ghost stories. In 1894, a priest sent by the diocese to assess the site fled the grounds in a state of shock, claiming, "The devil speaks from under that tomb." In 1932, a team of historical restorationists was hired by a private donor to investigate the monastery. The crew was led by architect and historian Edwin Marsden, a man known for his skeptical approach to the paranormal. He brought with him a small team of experts in medieval construction, hoping to uncover hidden chambers and perhaps even rescue lost manuscripts buried beneath the site. He scoffed at the idea of haunted tombs. By the 3rd night of the excavation, the whispers began. They were faint but unmistakable. One of the workers, a young assistant named Robert Clay, refused to return after he claimed to hear someone say his name from the darkness. Others in the team dismissed it as wind passing through old stone corridors, until Marsden himself stood in the crypt and heard the unmistakable sound of someone praying. The voice was low, female, and sorrowful, chanting something in broken Latin. Then, just before it faded, there came a final phrase, clear as day. "Mea culpa, Domini." My fault, Lord. Marsden, disturbed but still unconvinced of anything supernatural, ordered a full architectural survey of the crypt. That's when they made a peculiar discovery. The crypt had strange vertical shafts built into the walls, narrow and winding, connecting to the surface above through what seemed like old ventilation tunnels. But these shafts didn't serve any proper structural function. They didn't ventilate, they transmitted sound. With this revelation, Marsden dug deeper, both literally and in the archives. After weeks of work, a hidden chamber was uncovered behind one of the crypt's older tombs. Within it, a single stone coffin stood, unmarked except for a small iron cross etched into the lid. The team pried it open and found the mummified remains of a woman dressed in the tattered remains of a nun's habit. Her hands were folded in prayer. Her jaw was dislocated, as if she had screamed before death. Tucked beside her skeletal frame was a water-damaged leather-bound journal. Most of the pages had rotted away, but a few entries remained legible. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, and filled with smudged ink. From what could be deciphered, the woman had been a novice named Sister Marjorie, accused of heresy by a radical sect within the monastery leadership. Her crime, interpreting scripture independently, and, most damning of all, suggesting that God could be known without the church. The journal made clear she was sentenced to die in silence, sealed alive in the walls of the crypt by a fanatical monk named Father Elric. His name had been scrubbed from all official monastery records, but Marsden later found it in letters archived in York, letters that hinted at a man obsessed with penance and auditory isolation. He believed that souls could be purified if forced to confess in solitude, forever. The sound tunnels were his invention. A grotesque experiment. He had designed the crypt so that Sister Marjorie's dying whispers would echo eternally throughout the stone. She wasn't praying after death. Her final moments had been recorded in stone acoustics, played back by wind and time, a tragic echo of a woman pleading for mercy. When this truth came to light, the local council attempted to seal the crypt permanently. But by then, the story had spread. Paranormal investigators, historians, and thrill-seekers began sneaking onto the property at night, trying to hear the whispers for themselves. Some did. Others heard only silence. Marsden, tormented by guilt for disturbing the tomb, returned to the monastery in 1935 and destroyed the sound shafts himself, collapsing them with explosives and sealing the crypt under layers of concrete. He disappeared a year later. His last letter was addressed to a colleague and simply read, "She's quiet now, but I still hear her when it rains." Today, the monastery lies in ruin, fenced off and overgrown. No one dares approach it after dark. Not because of whispers, but because every so often, in the early hours of morning, someone passing on the road nearby claims to see a figure in white standing at the old entrance, her head bowed, lips moving. The vanishing colony of Duskmoor Isle. Off the ragged coast of northern Scotland lies a jagged speck of land known as Duskmoor Isle. Barely 2 miles wide, the island was once home to a small but thriving fishing village in the late 1500s. Life was harsh on the isle, with violent winds and freezing tides, but the community of Duskmoor was close-knit, superstitious, and fiercely independent. The mainlanders considered them odd, a people of old traditions and whispered rituals. But no one expected the mystery that would arise from this isolated corner of the world. In the spring of 1589, the king's tax collectors set sail from the mainland, heading to Duskmoor to retrieve overdue levies. When they arrived, they found no one. Not a soul. The entire village was abandoned. Boats were still tied to the dock, untouched. Fishing nets were laid out to dry. A pot of stew sat over a cold fire. 6 plates were arranged neatly on a table inside the chieftain's house, each with a fork and a goblet of wine. A candle still flickered, its wax barely melted. It was as if every single person, some 54 villagers, had simply vanished at once. There were no signs of struggle. No blood, no footprints leading into the woods, no evidence of flight or attack. The livestock remained penned. The wells were full. A child's toy lay beside a sleeping mat as if dropped only moments before. It was as though time had stopped, or the people had been plucked from existence in an instant. Authorities investigated, but answers never came. The island was searched multiple times. Divers scoured the surrounding waters. Nothing. The incident was recorded in royal documents as the vanishment of Duskmoor, and soon, tales grew around it. Some saying the villagers had been taken by sea spirits, others claimed they had angered an ancient god. Over the centuries, Duskmoor became legend, a name spoken with unease, a cautionary tale told by sailors. In 1997, over 400 years later, a group of marine geologists from the University of Edinburgh set out to map the seabed surrounding the Hebrides. Among their points of interest was Duskmoor Isle. By then, the village was long gone, only crumbling foundations and moss-covered stones remained. But what the sonar revealed below the surface changed everything. Roughly 300 meters from the shoreline, the seabed suddenly dropped into a sharp, perfectly circular depression. Nearly 50 meters deep, the geological formation wasn't natural. It resembled a sinkhole, massive and abrupt, with the unmistakable silhouette of stone structures at the bottom. The outlines of homes, even what appeared to be a chapel, were still visible. Duskmoor village hadn't disappeared, it had fallen. Further scans confirmed the shocking theory. Sometime in 1589, the ground beneath the village had collapsed. A massive subterranean cavern, hollowed out over centuries by coastal erosion, had caved in beneath the weight of the town. The villagers likely had no warning. In the span of seconds, the heart of Duskmoor had plummeted into the sea. Why had no debris or bodies surfaced? The answer came from the island's unique geology. The collapse had opened a direct conduit to a system of underwater caves that connected to the deeper ocean. The people, the homes, even the animals, everything was swept into the depths, carried away by powerful underwater currents. It was a tragedy, yes, but a natural one. And yet, questions remained. Why were there no signs of panic? Why had the table been set? Why was a candle still burning? The lead geologist, Dr. Lena Morris, proposed a disturbing possibility. A small tremor had been recorded in ice core samples from that era, barely detectable by modern standards, but enough to compromise already fragile ground. She theorized that the sinkhole opened silently, in stages. The outer edge of the village, where the docks and homes were located, collapsed first, pulling people down without warning. Those who remained, stunned or too shocked to flee, were taken in the next wave, minutes later. It would explain why everything appeared so untouched. Why meals had been left out. Why no one ran. But that didn't stop the legends. Divers who visited the underwater site reported eerie experiences. Cameras would malfunction near the ruins. Some claimed to hear knocking through the water. One diver returned early, pale and silent, refusing to speak of what he saw. His partner later said he had touched the remnants of the village chapel, and claimed it was warm. Locals still believe the truth is more sinister. They speak of the tolling bell, a sound said to echo from the island on foggy mornings. They say the bell calls those who listen too long. That the sea still remembers. Some believe the villagers were not victims of natural collapse, but of an ancient pact, broken. Today, Duskmoor Isle is uninhabited. The government has labeled the underwater site as unstable terrain and banned further exploration. But satellite images still show the shadow of the sunken town, like bones beneath glass. The mystery of Duskmoor was solved, in part. But the island remains cloaked in silence. Every year, on the anniversary of the vanishment, flowers appear on the shore. No one sees who leaves them. And still, when the wind is just right, the fishermen swear they can hear the clinking of glasses and laughter from beneath the waves. The Red-Eyed Child of Varša Forest. Deep in the remote woodlands of 19th-century Lithuania, near the border village of Varša, stories began to circulate of a strange child seen wandering through the forest. Locals whispered about a small, pale figure with unnaturally bright red eyes, who moved silently between the trees and vanished when approached. The first sighting was in the winter of 1811, when a hunter named Jakub Petratus claimed to see the child crouched by a frozen stream, watching him with glowing eyes. When he called out, the figure darted into the woods faster than any human child could move. Over the next few months, the sightings grew more frequent. Farmers and shepherds reported glimpses of the child at dusk, always at a distance. Sometimes, they claimed to hear soft weeping echoing through the trees. Dogs refused to enter the forest, and some even went missing. A group of men from the village, armed with lanterns and muskets, ventured into the woods one night to investigate. They returned shaken, reporting they'd seen the child watching them from the trees, his eyes like burning coals. The village priest, Father Andreas, declared the sightings to be a manifestation of evil, a forest demon or spirit taking the shape of a child to lure villagers astray. He warned the townspeople not to pursue it, not to speak its name, and never to answer if it called. The legend grew. People began to refer to the being as Raudonikis, meaning red ice. Then, the disappearances began. 3 people vanished over the next 2 years, 2 young boys and an old woman known for picking herbs near the forest edge. The townspeople blamed Raudonikis. Efforts were made to track the child, but each search ended in failure. The forest seemed to swallow all trace. At night, villagers would sometimes hear tapping on their windows, only to find no one there. Varša became a place of fear, its people bound by silence and ritual. Bells were tied to doors, charms were hung from trees, and no one entered the woods alone. Eventually, the village shrank. People moved away. By the mid-1800s, it was nearly abandoned. For over a century, the mystery of the red-eyed child remained unsolved, an eerie footnote in regional folklore. But in 2004, the story took an unexpected turn when an environmental survey team entered the Varša forest, now part of a conservation area. They were conducting soil and wildlife assessments when they discovered an unusual stone structure hidden beneath thick undergrowth, a moss-covered bunker, sealed with rusted iron. Inside, they found remnants of 19th-century furnishings, an old cot, broken tools, glass vials, and pages of handwritten notes in a mix of Latin and Polish. The bunker had clearly been a shelter, but more astonishingly, they discovered a set of skeletal remains buried beneath a loose panel in the floor. Alongside it, wrapped in deteriorating linen, was a locked wooden box. When the box was opened by historians at the University of Vilnius, its contents stunned the academic community. Inside were pages upon pages of journal entries, diagrams of eyes and skin, medical sketches, and records of physical examinations. The writings belonged to a physician named Dr. Mariusz Kozlowskis, a disgraced surgeon and anatomist who had fled Warsaw in the early 1800s. His disappearance was documented, but no one knew where he had gone, until now. Kozlowskis's journals told the story of a child he had found abandoned at the outskirts of a plague-ravaged village. The boy was mute, severely light-sensitive, and suffered from a rare genetic condition, erythropoietic protoporphyria, which caused his skin to blister in sunlight and made his eyes appear blood-red due to light sensitivity. Kozlowskis had taken the child in, not to care for him, but to study him. Obsessed with the idea that the child's condition held some evolutionary secret, he moved to the remote Varša forest to continue his experiments in isolation. The journals revealed horrific details. The doctor subjected the boy to extreme tests, exposure to light, sensory deprivation, and attempts to harden his skin with chemical treatments. He believed the child was a new kind of man, closer to primal instinct, and potentially immortal. The boy lived underground in the dark, away from society, and over time became more animal than human. One entry, dated 1813, reads, "He no longer speaks. He no longer weeps. He only watches, always watches. His eyes pierce the dark. I see them even when I sleep." Eventually, it became clear the doctor had lost control. The bunker's traps were evidence of his paranoia. One entry hinted at the child escaping. "He slipped past the bolt. I must find him. If he reaches the village, they will blame him for everything. But it is I who made him." Forensic analysis of the remains showed the skeleton to be Kozlowskis himself, dead from a fall or impact. His skull was cracked, likely from a blow. The cause of death was consistent with an accident, or a struggle. So, who, or what, was the red-eyed child seen after Kozlowskis's death? Scientists believe the boy survived, adapting to the forest using heightened senses and learned stealth. His red eyes were not supernatural, but a symptom of his condition. His ability to vanish was simply survival instinct honed to perfection. The disappearances, though never definitively explained, were likely tragic misfortunes or cases of villagers getting lost in the dense and unforgiving woods. But even after the discovery, questions lingered. Locals today still report strange encounters. Some hikers have claimed to see a figure watching them from the trees, low to the ground, unmoving. Occasionally, they return to find scratches on their car doors or handprints on fogged windows, too small for an adult, but too distorted for a child. The legend of Rodonakis has changed. He is no longer seen as a demon, but as a victim. A child mutated by nature, hidden by cruelty, and remembered through fear. And some believe he still lives, now ageless, part of the forest itself, red eyes glowing in the dark, watching from the shadows, never forgotten. The locked room of General Elgado. In the heart of Seville, Spain, stands the crumbling but once magnificent estate of General Tomás Elgado, a hero of the Napoleonic Wars, known for both his battlefield brilliance and his descent into isolation in the final years of his life. His estate, Casa Elgado, was the subject of intense curiosity not because of his military history, but because of a single room, a heavy oak door sealed with a custom iron lock, bolted shut from the outside, and marked with 3 Latin words scorched into the wood, Noli respicere mortem. Do not gaze upon death. For over a century, the room remained untouched. After Elgado's death in 1823, the estate passed through various owners. Each was warned of the locked chamber and advised never to open it. The deed to the house came with an explicit clause forbidding access to the room. Most assumed it was simply a superstition, a nobleman's eccentricity, until the first person broke the rule. In 1845, a curious new owner named Emilio Duarte, a scholar of medieval texts, ignored the warnings and forced the door open. According to his journal, he lasted only 10 minutes inside before fleeing the house, pale and incoherent. He died less than a month later, found drowned in the Guadalquivir River. Witnesses said he had become obsessed, muttering about eyes in the walls and the whisper of bone. After his death, the room was sealed again. Future owners didn't dare open it. But rumors flourished. Some said it was a torture chamber. Others believed Elgado had gone mad and locked away the spirit of a dying soldier, or perhaps even his own brother, rumored to have vanished without explanation. A local priest once declared the room to be a cursed place where death itself sleeps. Then, in 1957, the Spanish government purchased the property and turned it into a museum of military history. For decades, Casa Elgado drew tourists curious about its architecture and ghost stories, though the locked room remained untouched. Until 2009. That year, after a significant fire damaged the western wing of the estate, restoration teams were given full access. Under pressure from scholars and with modern equipment available, they finally unsealed the room. What they found was not what anyone expected. The room was small, barely more than 4 meters across, and in near-perfect condition. No soot, no dust, everything was preserved. In the center was a single wooden chair, facing a large, gilt-framed mirror that spanned the entire wall. On the chair sat the mummified corpse of a man in uniform, his back perfectly straight, his boots polished, his military medals gleaming under the dim light. The corpse was confirmed to be General Elgado. He had died in that chair, seated alone before the mirror. His expression was frozen in one of awe and terror. His hands, once gloved, had scratched deep gouges into the armrests. His eyes were gone, not removed, but shrunken, desiccated into hollow pits. Yet the rest of his body was impeccably preserved. The mirror, however, was stranger still. It did not reflect the room as it appeared. It showed the same chamber, but empty. The chair was there, the walls identical, but no corpse, no objects. The reflection was lifeless. The restoration team tried cleaning it, thinking it was an optical illusion. But even after removal and reinstallation in another room, the mirror refused to reflect any living being. It showed only the environment. Even odder, the mirror had no backing. Its glass pane was unusually thick and seemed to have depth. Scientists who examined it found the material composition didn't match any traditional glass. Some believed it had been chemically altered. Others suggested a unique form of silvering. But none could explain why it failed to reflect life. An old document was found sealed in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, written in Elgado's handwriting. It was a confession. The general described a moment during the war, when he had led his troops into a village already slaughtered by French forces. There, he found a strange woman in a red shawl, untouched amid the carnage. She said she could offer him clarity for the future, and handed him a small mirror, warning him never to turn it upon himself. Elgado, arrogant and ambitious, ignored the warning. He stared into the mirror the night he returned to Seville and claimed to see what came after death. Not angels. Not fire. Something else. An endless gray plain where forms moved in slow agony, some of them familiar. Faces of his fallen men. His brother. Himself. He became obsessed, sitting before the mirror night after night, hoping to change the vision. Hoping to see salvation. But the more he stared, the more he felt himself hollowing. He stopped eating, sleeping. One day, he found he no longer had a reflection. That was when he sealed himself in. "To those who enter after me," he wrote, "you must know, I opened a door that should never have been opened. The mirror is not a window. It is a mouth. And it remembers who has looked." The mirror was removed by the Spanish Ministry of Culture and placed in a secure facility. 4 years, it was kept in a lead-lined crate. Then in 2015, without explanation, it was listed as missing during an inventory audit. To this day, its whereabouts remain unknown. Some say it was destroyed. Others believe it was stolen and sits in a private collection. But strange stories have emerged in the years since, of people vanishing after purchasing antique mirrors in Madrid, or seeing rooms that aren't there in Reflections. The room at Casa Elgado has been sealed once more. Visitors are told it is structurally unsound. But guards report odd activity, footsteps in the empty corridor, faint tapping on the sealed door, and sometimes, late at night, the sound of a wooden chair creaking from within. The Screaming Skull of Bellwick Manor. In the quiet countryside of Dorset, England, stands Bellwick Manor, a grey, brooding estate perched at the edge of a windswept moor. Built in the early 1700s by the Lovelace family, the manor had long been associated with local ghost tales and superstitions. But none compared to the story of the Screaming Skull, a grotesque relic hidden deep within the house that became the centerpiece of one of Britain's strangest, and ultimately solvable, historical mysteries. The legend was first documented in 1824 by Reverend Jonathan Tallow, who described a disturbing object stored inside a locked cabinet in the west attic of the house. It was a human skull, yellowed with age, partially broken, yet still retaining its teeth. The Lovelace family referred to it only as her, and refused to move or even touch it. When a curious housemaid attempted to bury it in the garden, the manor was said to erupt in a series of violent disturbances. Windows shattered spontaneously, the horses bolted from the stables, and the maid was found the next morning unconscious at the base of the stairs, muttering nonsense in an unknown tongue. The skull was returned to its cabinet, and the disturbances ceased. It became a rule of the house, passed from heir to heir, that the skull must never be removed, hidden, or buried. If it was, the manor would scream. Over the decades, visitors reported strange experiences: cold drafts in the attic despite sealed windows, low murmurs heard through the walls, and on rare nights, a soul-piercing scream that echoed through the corridors at exactly 2:17 a.m. No one could trace the source. For nearly 200 years, the skull was accepted as just another cursed artifact, its origins unknown, its rage inexplicable. Until 2011. That year, a team of historians and forensic researchers from the University of Exeter obtained rare access to the attic at Bellwick, with permission from the last living descendant of the Lovelace line. Dr. Hannah Corwin, a historical anthropologist, led the investigation. Her team began by carbon dating the skull, expecting it to be perhaps 200 to 300 years old. But the results shocked everyone. The bone was over 1,000 years old, dating back to around the 10th century, well before the construction of the manor. More revealing still was the shape and condition of the skull. Though damaged, the bone structure suggested the person had been female, roughly in her 20s, and suffered a violent death, blunt trauma to the side of the head, and deep blade marks along the jaw and neck. Further scans revealed what no one expected: tiny traces of a lead and gold inlay within the sinus cavity, and remnants of burial herbs commonly used in Viking ceremonial rites. The breakthrough came when one of Corwin's colleagues, a linguist named David Ellis, compared the strange symbols found etched faintly into the cabinet with Norse runes. One set of markings, translated phonetically, referenced a name, Elswith of Skarvik. The records were sparse, but a Norse-English document from 994 AD mentioned a Skarvik settlement in the area, long lost to time, ravaged during a period of internal strife between Danish settlers and Saxon warlords. Elswith, it seemed, had been a woman of high status, possibly a priestess or oracle, based on the inlay found in her skull, a ritual known in some Viking communities as the anointing of the voice, believed to grant second sight in death. It was thought that if improperly buried, such a soul could not rest, and would cry out until honored properly. Corwin hypothesized that Elswith had been executed, likely beheaded, by locals fearing her influence or seeing her as a threat. Her skull, preserved and later hidden, eventually ended up in the foundations of what would become Bellwick Manor. The first Lord Lovelace, an antiquarian with a fascination for artifacts, may have discovered the skull during the estate's construction and kept it as a curiosity. But why the screams? In one of the manor's disused storage rooms, hidden behind a false wall, the team discovered a second relic, an old manuscript journal belonging to Lord Lovelace's sister, Eliza, dated 1723. In it, she described recurring nightmares and visions of a woman in crimson robes standing silently at the foot of her bed. Eliza believed the woman's soul was trapped, and that the screaming began only after she attempted to bless the skull and bury it secretly. Eliza wrote of a strange night in which she heard the scream, went to the attic, and found the skull sitting outside the cabinet, though no one had moved it. Corwin's team presented a bold theory. The screaming was a psychological and acoustic phenomenon triggered by environmental conditions interacting with the skull's structure and the tightly sealed attic. During the exact time when atmospheric pressure, temperature, and wind speed reached specific thresholds, wind passing through the chimney and decaying mortar may have created a unique harmonic resonance, filtered through the hollow skull. In short, the house was literally screaming through the bones. To test the theory, they reconstructed the conditions and recorded the sound, a long, rising wail that could easily be mistaken for a human cry. Analysis showed that it only occurred when the skull was disturbed from its position in the cabinet, aligning with centuries of folklore. But that wasn't all. Further investigation revealed the cabinet itself had been lined with a thin layer of pine and birch, the exact types of wood used in Norse ceremonial coffins. The Lovelace family may have unknowingly preserved the very rites needed to keep the spirit at peace. The screams were real, yes, but they were also part of a complex historical echo, born of ritual, weather, and tragedy. In 2013, Bellwick Manor was closed to the public for safety reasons, and the skull was moved to the British Museum under specific ritual guidelines recommended by modern Norse pagan communities. Since its removal, the manor has remained silent. The screaming skull, once a tale of terror, became a window into a forgotten past, revealing a woman whose voice carried over centuries, demanding justice not through words, but through the wind, the stone, and the bone she left behind. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?